Space Talks with Z is hosted by America's Future Series great friend and advisor, Zaheer Ali. Space Talks with Z provides a forum for thought leaders to share insights and recommendations on how America and its allies can stay at the forefront of exploration, commercialization, and defense of space. Please visit our website to register to see all of Z's content and our many other programs for free at www.americas-fs.org.
Hi there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Space Talks with Z. I'm Zaheer Ali, your host and COO of Positon Incorporated. We are brought to you today with the generous support of America's Future Series and Comtech. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome two industry giants from the space economy. Ken Peterman, President, CEO, and Chairman of Comtech Telecommunications Group, formerly President of Viasat Government Systems, an original satellite expert. Also joining us is Professor Dr. Greg Autry, the original space scholar, who in many ways created the field of study of commercial space 20 years ago. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. It is truly a privilege.
Good morning. Hi, Z.
Hi, Glenn.
Glad to be here.
So, folks, I want to jump right into it. We're gonna hear more about these gentlemen's careers through their perspectives. So let's just get to it. Ken, you've had an amazing career already. You've been a leader in space, but earlier in your career, it was kind of what people think of as old space. And now we have new space. Where these things change, what the borderline is of course debatable, but we all can kind of point at certain key things. We can point at the X Prize. We can point at the reduction in cost of launch by SpaceX. But you having spanned these eras as a leader gives you a unique perspective. Can you start us off by sharing your view of this evolution? What talent enabled it and what innovations drove it?
Well, thank you, Z. I'll tell you that I've seen a lot. It's been a little more than 40 years. So when I came out of university with an electrical engineering degree, we would call it communications, maybe a little bit. We don't call it cybersecurity back then, but I had some credentials, and I went to work in the defense industrial base, because I'll tell you, in the 80s and even into the 90s, that's where all the cool stuff was happening. We were inventing GPS, we were inventing satellite communications, we were inventing mobile networking, we were inventing ways to secure that. All of those kinds of technologies were launched to help our men and women in uniform be safer, be able to communicate, be able to know where their buddies are, be able to see the world around them, have a certain degree of situational awareness. And it was an exciting time. But I'll tell you, the second 20 years of my career, we saw the commercial technology companies grab a hold of these technologies, and they invested money faster. They used agile development techniques. They focused on 80% solutions instead of having to satisfy the corner cases that you worry about in a defense situation. And of course, they were able to move so much faster because in DoD, acquisition is predicated on inventing something that's never been done before. So you've got a need statement that has to be validated, a requirement that's validated. Then you budget the money. That takes 3 or 4 years. Then you write a specification, and then ultimately you have a competition. That process can often take 9 to 12 years just to get a company under contract to build something. And the other thing that happened in DoD was no single company had the wherewithal to build an entire satellite ecosystem. So they had to break the problem down. And they had to offer, one company built the antenna for the user terminal, and somebody else built the modem for the user terminal. And then they had to let maybe 20 or 30 or 40 contracts in order to put the ecosystem together. So it took an enormous amount of time. It was all governed by DoD acquisition, leadership, and engineering. And it was funded by the power of the public purse. Okay. But the 20 years in the career later, it was all private industry moving to monetize and capitalize on the opportunity to connect the unconnected and to enable commerce with electronic connectivity, and the whole world changed. So it's been an exciting time. And in fact, looking back now, DoD is really struggling to find ways to leverage commercial technologies for the warfighter, because in the time it takes DoD to acquire a 2G system, they find out they're living in a 5G world and 2G is obsolete. Okay. And so now it's a very exciting time. Things are moving faster. And through my career, I started in the defense industrial base, and since then have moved to commercial companies, because now that's where the excitement is, at least for me.
That's amazing. Now, thank you for that. And a really amazing point about the accelerative effect of the commercial sector jumping into this in many ways. And so many things happen along that, so many technological advances that they leverage that the government just can't jump into. Now, Greg, as perhaps the original scholar of commercial space, having been there sounding the call in the early 2000s, how and particularly as an observer of the commercial market, which you've written extensively about, both in editorial and in peer-reviewed publications, how do you see this evolution having happened?
Wow, today's actually a special day, Z. I don't know if you thought about it, but back in 2002, when I became an adjunct professor at the Mirage School of Business at UC Irvine, and I started looking for a research context to do some business case studies and other business management research. And I chose the commercial space industry, and I remember getting these head shake looks from my academic peers saying, that is not a place to study entrepreneurship, which was my area of expertise. That's the military industrial complex, and nobody's ever going to have a startup there ever again. And I'm like, well, I've met this guy named Elon, and I think you're going to hear from him. But it was in June of 2004. I was out of Mojave, and Spaceship One, built by Brute Rutan, crazy startup founder who had kind of taken over the home-built aircraft business, suddenly decided he was going to build a spacecraft. And I'd followed him for a few years, and they invited me out. And, they did that. And Richard Branson came out on the runway after one of the Spaceship One flights, and he had a shirt embroidered with Virgin Galactic, and he announced in 2004, I'm going to start a commercial space flight company, and I'm going to buy 5 of these things. And it was today, almost 20 years later, that they did their first paid commercial flight. They just did that this morning. A long, hard road that I have watched them trod, and watched the industry develop over that time. So that has been really interesting. It's been a pleasure to have made that decision. Today, I'm actually pretty cool in management scholarships, and my peers are reaching out to me from around the world, wanting me to open my Rolodex for them and connect them to this research context. I just did an hour with a doctor of philosophy student from Warwick in the UK this morning, who's doing a dissertation on space. So it's been an exciting place to be. Is Ken alluded, that transition from the way things were done, right, to the new disruptive environment has been really interesting. It's been interesting from my perspective too, to not only watch the new startups come along, but watch the older companies realize they're being disrupted and how they're handling that. Some very well, some not so well. It shouldn't be a mystery, because most of us are old enough to have seen the PC business and the internet business and watch these things happen, right? So we understand how the dance is done. But that's been really exciting to me to see companies, for instance, I've got rocket models behind me from SpaceX and from ULA, and watch the way like Tory Bruno, who I think is a really disruptive thinker in his own right, take the incumbent company and think different. It's been exciting. You're on mute.
Z, you're on mute, my friend.
Yep, my bad. We'll stop there. Give them a cut. So, Greg, thanks for that. One of the things that jumps out is that we've seen the cost of launch plummet and increasing numbers of companies rush technologies to orbit. But it almost seems chaotic, perhaps, in many ways. And of course, the free market's messy. We saw a lot of this with the internet and microcomputers before that. But do you see a roadmap emerging from this rush to orbit?
Well, that's a good question. And do we want one, right? So sometimes letting the evolutionary, Darwinian environment do its thing and take us where we're going to go, creates an awful lot of new capabilities. As a nation, though, we have policy, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that drives us there. I've had the pleasure of observing this from the academic side and being inside the government in a couple of different roles, helping to lead it in the direction that, at least as a nation, we believe that it wants to go. I get the sense that the industry is beginning to coalesce, though, around a sense of having a roadmap. I think that it's clear from NASA on down that low Earth orbit is going to become the domain of commercial space from a human spaceflight perspective, and we're seeing the commercial LEO destinations start to pop up. I think that everybody realizes that a lot of things that used to be pretty limited to fairly exquisite technology like remote sensing and in Earth imaging at higher cadence now are going to be roles that commercial is going to play, and communications is being revolutionized there. So everybody understands that, and the government is going to benefit from that. So the question is, where do the people with extra capabilities beyond that move out to? And when we think of, what NASA could do with Lockheed Martin or whatever, then you see that pushing out. And cislunar space is clearly the next step. Commercial is right behind government, though, in Artemis and on CLPS to get in there. And I think there's a cooperation going on that's really great, where the government is pushing the edge of that envelope, and commercial is flowing in right behind, and they're eager to do so. So I'm pretty excited about where we see that going.
Oh, that's so. Ken, I'd love your thoughts on that. What Greg brought up there, particularly as someone who's from conception to obsolescence, been part of the life cycle of so many orbital assets. How do you see your sector evolving, interplaying with others? Is this an age of infrastructure and logistics, or are we moving beyond that?
Well, first of all, let's talk about it. Greg's focus on policy is a really challenging one, because policy tends to look through the lens of the technology that exists today. And it's hard sometimes to imagine what technology will be here 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. So policy has to try to be forward looking. And in this age of new space, that's really challenging. You've got companies changing the game with the way satellites are designed and built. You've got companies changing the game with cislunar, with space stations. And they envision a space station being a depot or a warehouse where spare parts and LEO satellites can reside, and companies can pull from that warehouse in order to restock orbital belts and constellations. We're looking at companies looking to mine asteroids or even other planets for precious metals. And it used to be, that these things were driven by government, because it required the power of the public purse and a broad swath of different companies to be engaged together to make something happen. But now you've got companies that are just doing it. Okay. And right. So, and there's been technology change. I look, in the beginning, the early satellites were all geostationary orbit. They were always parked over the same point in the Earth. And frankly, they were designed much like broadcast television. Because one signal, just like you remember broadcast television, maybe some people don't even remember that. There was a big tower near the center of town that broadcast in
That's right.
in multiple directions, and everybody, if there was a tower for a network like ABC or NBC or CBS, and everybody got the same programming, and it was all about signal strength and range. And if you were within 30 or 40 miles of that tower, you probably had pretty good television. Otherwise, you had to get an antenna that was 200 feet tall, and there's all that. So satellites were designed the same way. Now, then there was a fundamental change, and somebody decided they would design a satellite like a cellular base station instead of broadcast TV. Okay, now a cellular base station can support tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of individual subscribers, and they each feel like they're having a private and secure connection to that cell tower or to the endpoint the cell tower connects them to. Completely different concept. And so the capacity of a satellite went from maybe 12 or 13 or 15 gigabits per second of capacity. Now, all of a sudden, with the cell tower architecture, satellites had capacities of 100 gigabits per second, 300 gigabits per second, a terabit per second, okay? And now the satellites are being deployed with more than a terabit per second of capacity. Now, if the cost of a satellite is about the same to do 13 gigabits per second or a terabit per second capacity, the economics change. The ability to connect more people at lower subscription rates changes. Okay, so you saw that. Now, these satellites in geospace, in geosynchronous orbit, we used to use a term called space qualified hardware. Because a satellite in geosynchronous orbit, it might be the size of a bus or even a double-decker bus. And it's going to be up there for 15 or 17 years. So it's got to work, and it's got to have backup, and it's got to have redundancy, and all of that's got to be space qualified. Well, now you move to LEO, and the point Greg made is exactly right. LEO satellites, because they're much lower to the Earth and they're orbiting the Earth, okay, they only have a life of maybe 3 to 5 years. And then they basically decel and come out of orbit and have to be replaced. So the price of launch comes down. That enables LEO belts to be populated with constellations of satellites. Now, because the life of a LEO satellite is only 3 to 5 years and it's going to be replaced anyway, space qualified hardware is not necessary. It doesn't have to have much more quality than an automobile. Okay, so now they can be cheaper. You can make them on assembly line. And in fact, if you launch them into space and 1 in 50 actually don't deploy properly, you figure that that's a yield I can accept. So it changes the game. Okay, and so now we move into the LEO architecture as being being the Wild West, or the space world. The growth is coming. Now something else changes. The ground infrastructure for those original geosynchronous satellites was very fixed. It was designed one time because the satellite has a life of 15, 17, 20 years. The ground infrastructure would sit there and basically operate the same for 20 years, notwithstanding the fact that user subscriber use cases might be evolving and other technology might be changing. You didn't really have a chance to change or update the technology in that ecosystem. Now, when you move to LEO, it's totally different. If you know in advance that a third or a fourth of your constellation is going to be replaced every year, you don't want a stationary ground infrastructure design. You want ground infrastructure that isn't based in hardware. You want it to be virtualized or cloud native, so that you can watch the way your user subscribers are using the network, and you can evolve the space segment to keep pace with those changing user trajectories. And you need to be able to evolve the ground infrastructure also to keep pace with those changing user trajectories. So now we move to ground infrastructure that's cloud native. And instead of seeing the companies buy ground infrastructure once, they establish a partnership with a company that is their ground infrastructure partner. And they buy that as a service and a kind of a partnership, because they want that ground infrastructure to evolve over time and keep pace with these changing user subscriber patterns. So it changes the business model as the technology changes. And circling back to Greg, that causes policymakers to have to think really hard about what's going to happen next, and how to manage that in a way that controls but doesn't constrain the economic and technology trajectories that are in play.
You touched on a lot of amazing and really important points there. And it seems like some of that discussion is related to things I know we've discussed before in regards to convergence. We'll get to the policy in just a minute, but I want to stay on this point that I think you're making is things are coming together. Is that around LEO? Is that the point of convergence?
The convergence is much more sweeping than just that. Okay, and I tell you, it was driven initially. If you look at the space companies that are involved in geosynchronous satellites, okay, it's the traditional big five of and I don't have to name. Everybody knows who they are.
Right. The Beltway Bandits.
That's right. But they thought, I think, in a lot of ways that this new space at medium and low Earth orbits was really not going to threaten them. But the thing that changed was the users. Okay, the users needed a blended or hybridized solution. Just like your cell phone is constantly connected on 3 or 4 different connectivity options. You have Bluetooth, you have Wi-Fi, you have cellular, and actually, I'll get to it in a minute. Some of your mobile phones now actually have a connection to a LEO satellite. Okay, and so it was the user's desire to have a satellite terminal, say connecting their home, that had the capacity that a geosynchronous satellite could provide to watch Netflix movies or whatever they want to do. But they also needed the low latency of a LEO satellite because in the other room, they have a child doing online gaming. Okay, and you need the low latency that requires. So what users wanted was a blended connectivity solution, such that with a decision engine, just like in your smartphone, you don't control anything. Your smartphone knows that, that what goes over Bluetooth, what goes over Wi-Fi, and what goes over cellular. They want a satellite terminal that connects to LEO for that data that requires low latency. They connects to GEO when it's high capacity. They want your satellite connectivity in your home to operate the same way. They want it to be seamless. Okay. Now, so we started to see deals made between companies at LEO and companies at GEO because the customer was demanding that hybrid connectivity. Okay, now the customer's going farther. They want space and terrestrial convergence. You see, I mentioned before, they want direct to device. They want, when they're not in an area, let's say they jump in their fishing boat, they go 20 miles out to sea, they're fishing or something, or hiking in the mountains. There's no cellular coverage, there's no Wi-Fi coverage, there's none of that. If they have a 911 problem or they have a emergency, they need connectivity, they still want to be connected. So now you're seeing a convergence of space and terrestrial. And you're seeing, which were traditionally very different markets using different frequency bands, using different waveforms with different companies providing the service. I'll tell you the other thing, and we've seen that over the last couple of years, I think beginning maybe 2 or 3 years ago. What you're seeing now, just starting, okay, and so I think we're on the cusp of this, is communication satellites and electro-optical geospatial satellites have been two completely independent domains, okay, with typically companies either in geospatial or they're in communications, but you don't see companies doing both. And I think we're going to find, but what you do see is the ground infrastructure that serves the communications market, satellite market, can also readily serve the geospatial market, because fundamentally coming down from space, it's ones and zeros, and it's whether it's imagery or whether it's communications, from a technology perspective, from a ground infrastructure perspective, it looks very much the same. Okay, so I believe what you're going to see next is you're going to see a convergence of communication space and geospatial space. And you're going to see constellations that aren't 30,000 satellites that only do communications. You're going to see some of those satellites have a geospatial attribute on them, because what people want is people are moving from wanting to be connected to actually wanting to be empowered by the information that's inherent in the data that moves over the network. And I'll give you a quick example. We were really excited when we had GPS in our cars. Because we could put in a destination and they would tell us how to get there, and you'd see the little dot move along the path as you move down the highway. That was pretty cool. Okay, now the geospatial guys, when let's say there was an accident 5 miles ahead. Okay, right. Now all of a sudden the information in the network can empower you to know there's an accident. Now in the beginning, people thought it was really cool. They wanted streaming video to see what the accident looked like, but after a period of time,
doesn't sound like a good idea.
Well, in the defense community, they did. The defense community, they all wanted to see what was happening over the hill. Okay, but the problem is that takes people staring at a screen, and you can't do other things. So people want to be unencumbered. What they want is the insight that imagery enables them. So what we see now is let's use, going back to my GPS example, nobody really wants to see the streaming video of a congestion. Okay, what they want is to be told how to deal with it. So what you're getting now is the power of a smart network is the information, and the customer value creation is the information that's available, where we can give insight to the person in the car that says, guess what? There's an accident 5 or 6 miles ahead. You need to get off at this next exit, and I'm going to route you this way, and I'll preserve your ETA at your destination within a minute, but you need to follow my instructions. That is the insight that now empowers us. Now the network, if that insight comes from the network also knows I can't tell every car to get off at the same exit and take the alternate route. I have to disperse those cars.
For us. It's doing traffic management, basically.
Exactly. So the network has to be smart enough to also do the data processing analytics and the prediction algorithms to be able to route the different cars on different ways. Otherwise, they've just moved the congestion problem from the place where the accident is to the place where they're trying to bypass the accident. So all of these things now we're changing the world by harnessing the information that's available in a smart network and putting it to work for people by delivering to them insight that's trusted and actionable. And that's interesting. Okay. And going back to a policy perspective, how do you govern that? And how do you make sure that it's cyber secure? And how do you make sure, there's a lot of thoughts that go into the policy making associated with that.
Right. Well, I'd love to pivot to Greg on that perspective specifically. One thing that we didn't mention earlier is that Professor Autry was a two-time appointee in the Trump administration, helped fundamentally change the direction of NASA, helped create the Space Force. So, policy is something he knows a little bit about. How do you see that change? It's clearly not just important for the soccer mom trying to get home from a tournament, but it's perhaps more important for a convoy of Marines doing something for God and country somewhere in the world. But policy is a critical piece of it. Greg, please add your thoughts, sir.
Well, there's a lot there. One thing I want to do, I want to give the United States government kudos, right? We talk about being reactive and how policy looks at, what's in front of it and doesn't seem to skate to where the puck is. In a few cases in space, the U.S. has done a super good job. Way back in the 1980s, following the Challenger problem, the United States government realized that, hey, the space shuttle was in fact not going to launch everything into space, and we needed a commercial space market. And under the Reagan administration, they established the Office of Space Commerce and the Commerce Department and the Office of Commercial Space Transportation in the Department of Transportation, and tried to create a one-stop licensing and permitting shop for space launch and reentry. That was really wise. They stood up the ComStack to allow industry to have a FACA to advise the DOT on the licensing regulation. And I'm proud to have served on the ComStack for 4 years, actually. So that was, really interesting to see from the outside. But they also realized that we need to encourage, facilitate, and support. And Congress put that language into the regulations for the Office of Space Transportation and Commerce. And they've taken that role in the past fairly seriously. So we've done good there. And it's one of the reasons you see this happening in the United States, right? And you even see, and this is really weird in any other industry, you see companies from around the world choosing to come to the United States to do business, including manufacturing, right? And so you've got Rocket Lab moved basically from New Zealand to Huntington Beach and then Long Beach, California. Virgin could have done their development in the UK or anywhere else. Their founders from the UK, their money's mostly from the Middle East, and yet they came to the United States to do it. So we deserve some credit for understanding commercial space was going to happen. And when I had the opportunity to serve on the presidential transition team and the agency review team at NASA, we looked at NASA priorities and came up with things like Back to the Moon, which I'm super proud of. But more broadly, the administration looked at public-private partnerships and what commercial space could do. And, these things were discussed well and implemented. And the exciting thing is you can see that the Biden administration has continued basically all of those policies and expanded upon them. So I think in some ways policy's heading in the right way, Z. But you are dead right. The government has its own interest helping those Marines in whatever situation. On the same course, though, a lot of this stuff is dual use. So if we create communication systems, imaging system, hopefully someday space solar power systems that can direct reasonably small amounts of power to forward operating units doing something interesting. They can also help with a rescue effort in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or if Puerto Rico gets hit by a hurricane, help them reestablish communications and provide data and power to a hospital there. So there's a lot of overlap there. And if we're policy wise, we don't lock these things away so only DoD can do them, or we don't leave them entirely commercial. We realize that there's that convergence that Ken was talking about across not just technological domains, but different policy domains.
That's thought provoking, and I have a question for you, if I can ask you. I'd be interested in your thoughts. When you think of regulating interstate commerce or highways, or when you think of regulating spectrum like the FCC does, a country like the United States has a certain autonomy, because within our geography, within our borders, the spectrum, the highways, whatever it might be, we can choose to govern that how we see fit. But now, but now let's go to space. In geosynchronous orbit, you have an international organization that governs and establishes the priority for the different orbital slots at the geosynchronous orbital belt around the equator. Okay, but as you move to MEO and LEO, and these satellites are moving, the U.S. on its own, right, can't establish policy that other countries, if I launch from Rwanda, or I launch from Luxembourg, or I launch from China, I might have a different set of rules. So at these low Earth orbits and medium Earth orbits, it's still a little bit like the Wild West, where you've got first come, the right of the first arrival owns the orbital belt to a certain degree, and I think that I'm interested in the challenge that presents from a policymaking perspective.
Yeah, it sure does, Ken. I have to say it's interesting. 12 years ago, there were about 1,000 satellites in orbit. And today, I don't know what the count is, but it's got to be approaching 9,000. Almost all of those additional 8,000 satellites are American satellites, right? So the U.S. has a unique opportunity, I think, very much like we did when we established the standards for air traffic control, to establish those standards and then see them adopted globally for everybody's benefit. We have failed, though, frankly, to be coordinated in deciding who's going to handle space traffic management and space situational awareness, and eventually debris mitigation. There's some people want the Office of Space Commerce. I support that. That was the decision made in the Trump administration. The Biden administration supports that. Some people in Congress have been dragging their feet because they want DOT to handle it, and then FCC just steps in on their own and starts establishing some rules for satellites. So that is not well coordinated. That is something we could do better, and it put us in a position of some power when we go to negotiate with the rest of the world on how these things should be done. And I think we need to move really quickly, and Congress needs to get their act together on that topic.
Yeah, one thing that we haven't touched on, and given that I've got you two gentlemen here with your specific perspectives, Greg, you're a professor at Thunderbird School of Global Management, helped launch the Space Leadership, Business, and Policy degree. And Ken, you've hired, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people. You know a thing or two about finding the right talent, putting it in place, and making sure things get done. And like we saw in many ways with software, we as a nation were somewhat unprepared for what we would need. Right now, it's funny for me because a lot of my cousins are here because of that from India on H-1B visas. Fremont is Little India. I don't think there's anywhere in the world to get better Indian food outside of India than Fremont, California. It's a little Londonized, but I'm happy to we should go there and debate this over a kebab in Manchester or something, right? But there is a workforce discussion here too that needs to happen, right? The American Academy of Arts and Sciences has pointed out the need, in particular, the need for citizens and those who want to become citizens to be part of this. What pipeline do you gentlemen see? And please, I think maybe I want to just toss this to Greg, because I know you thought about this as part of launching the degree. What do you see as the pipeline we need right now?
Wow. Well, so nobody doubts that we need more STEM professionals in the United States. This is, beaten to death, frankly, and it's not just about space. It's broadly across the tech sector that to some extent we've fallen down competitively there. This is a little controversial in academia, but I'm going to say we have failed to keep seats open for American students, particularly when it comes to graduate level laboratories and stuff in like computer science, mechanical engineering, and all. I am all about immigrants from friendly countries that want to come here, stay here, and contribute to our country. But frankly, we've been filling those labs up with peer competitors from an aggressor state, and that has not been a wise national decision. Besides going into elementary schools and trying to inspire young girls to join the STEM community and underrepresented folks in that area, which is a great goal. We need to do something more immediately because that doesn't solve our pipeline problem today. So I've looked at leadership and management, which is a huge problem as all these new companies form and as the business begins to grow in a beyond linear function towards $1 trillion or bigger dollar economy. We're going to need a lot of managers, frankly, and we can bring managers in from other sectors and train them in space. And so that's why I decided that not only did we need to do that, but we need an executive level program so we can bring in people who are already qualified and experienced and give them what they need to know about space in an intense environment. And that's why I've, as you know, launched the program with UZ at Thunderbird. And guess what? Everywhere I look, I see people popping up and trying to copy it. If they're not doing a full management degree like we are, they're copying our certificate program. And, they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So thank you, Harvard and MIT and just about everybody else who's trying to do that now.
Yeah, so that's an amazing perspective. Ken, I'd love to ask you, as a CEO, sitting there saying, look, I need to continue my team to grow, to mute, to evolve. And it's funny because the three of us are all people who come from deep technical backgrounds in one way or another and have moved into management, policy, executive roles. So how do you see this evolving from your seat, sitting, as a CEO of a commercial company? Is it simply that, well, we just need a pipeline of engineers and that's simple because we know how to train them? Or are there things to be done there? How do you train the future executives? How do you train the future Ken Petermans?
Okay, so I've got a lot of scar tissue, a lot of aggregated wisdom that's been collected over the years.
That's necessary too, right? To become an executive.
First of all, I'll say Greg's exactly right. STEM is so important. So I'll tell you from my chair, whether we're hiring a corporate lawyer or whether we're hiring our corporate business executives, whether we're hiring our corporate finance team, a knowledge of science, technology, engineering, and math is really, really important, because if you don't understand the technology and the technology trajectories and what they're going to enable people to do, and how we can put that to work in innovative ways, how we can monetize technology in innovative ways. If you don't understand the root technology, it's an encumbrance that's difficult to overcome. So I really support a focus on STEM starting in elementary school. The other attribute that I really value personally is I love the constructive disruptor, the one that challenges the status quo. Okay, and frankly, in some ways, I'm frustrated by our school systems, our elementary and high school systems, because and Clayton Christensen wrote a book about this called Disrupting Class that I'll reach back to. And he said, we're training people to sit down, behave, respect the teacher as the authority, and we're training people to, in many ways, be a factory worker. Okay, and what we need to be, and some of the great entrepreneurs. Okay, whether you want to talk about, you talk about Jeff Bezos, you want to talk about Steve Jobs at Apple. Many of these folks didn't finish school, okay, because they found it not exciting. It didn't work for them, okay? When they were challenging the teacher of why do we do it this way and why can't we go faster, whatever it is, they found that environment that environment doesn't foster creativity. It doesn't foster the challenger DNA that I really appreciate. The people that I really like to surround myself with at a corporate level, from a leadership team perspective, are people that will challenge the status quo and ask, why do we do it that way? Just because we always did it that way, just because we always monetize the technology a certain way, just because why do we continue to do it that way? Why can't we do it another way? I really value that, and I think we foster that. So yes, I look for in my leadership team and my middle managers, I look for a knowledge of STEM. I also look for this challenger, this disruptor, that respectfully, okay. And I find that diversity creates that, because when you have a diverse group across your leadership team that come from different backgrounds and different experiences, they have trained their decision calculus to work different ways. Okay, so when you get a group of those people in a room trying to solve a problem together in a respectful environment, I find that very innovative, thought-provoking ideas come out. Okay, and so I really value that, because in a commercial market, that entrepreneurial gene that finds a better way So many times in business, so many businesses they have been disrupted because they try to incrementally improve a device or a product. You can take the flip phone. Okay, people were trying to incrementally improve that a little bit so the battery would last longer. It was a little lighter, whatever it might be. Okay, and all along came the BlackBerry, and the BlackBerry completely disrupted the flip phone because it incorporated the email capability that the flip phone couldn't do. Okay, and then the BlackBerry got disrupted because they focused on a little better keypad, a little better display, a little longer battery life, incrementally improving the device that had been so successful, disrupting the status quo. And along came the smartphone and completely disrupted the BlackBerry and essentially ended that chapter. Okay, because the smartphone now, you could make reservations at a restaurant. You could download a boarding pass. You could do online banking. You could do so many things that you could never do before. That imposed then requirements on the communications infrastructure to support greater bandwidth and more endpoints and all of that. So there is value in the constructive disruptor that also has a technology. The third leg of that chair probably is a certain business acumen, because even if you're in engineering, and almost every engineering decision has an economic attribute that has to be considered. Okay, and so a certain knowledge of business, I think, is also really important.
No, thank you for that. That's amazing. And you touched a lot of things, all the way from STEM to business. And it's funny because one of the things that's funny about what you said is that you valued the disruptor. I think, and you made the example of school. It's amazing how many people who are innovators and disruptors, when you dig into their background, including perhaps even Dr. Autry's, you find that their path was non-linear, because that you have to go, we say outside the box, but it's a cliche. When you're actually there, it's actually quite hard, and you have a lot of people kind of yelling at you or telling you that you're wrong, you don't know what you're doing. So the discussion of doing it in a controlled setting is very interesting. And also, I just want to point out that you can't, Ken came to the discussion of diversity from a purely functional standpoint, not from a social standpoint. And that's, of course, important. But if we're going to make change, there has to be value created from decision making. And so that's a really interesting point that I just want to highlight. Now, you've made some really interesting moves with Comtech recently. You hired Nicole Robinson, who was formerly with Ursa, which she helped take to the next level. And you've also initiated the groundbreaking of a factory in Arizona. I believe it's near Chandler, pardon me if I'm wrong, which is in the greater Phoenix area. So those are some bold moves. How do you see the future of Comtech evolving and the industry evolving in Arizona, which is a state, when you think about space, you hear about California, Florida, Colorado, and the DC metro, and more recently Texas, right, with SpaceX moving their operations there for Starship. How do you see this evolving in other parts of the country and particularly for Comtech?
Well, thank you. We have of course employees in about 40 states. We're in 14 locations in North America. We have an international footprint as well. But what we choose technology corridors because we want to create a culture of innovation. We want to create a kind of meritocracy where we value ideas. It's not about who sits in the corner office or who sits at the end of the table and has the authority from a hierarchical or an organizational perspective. We value ideas, and we believe that the best idea should win, and we should create an environment where that idea can emerge and flourish, okay, and have visibility. Arizona is a technology corridor that we like. It has business there in our technology sector. It has universities and talent that way. One of the things we did under my leadership about 10 months ago, I've only been the CEO of Comtech about 10 or 11 months. One of the first decisions we made was to bring our siloed businesses together as one Comtech so that we could collaborate more effectively. We weren't doing that. And that was largely market driven, because I talked earlier about the market wants ground infrastructure for satellite constellations that's going cloud native. And so we have to be able to put our modems and our amplifiers and our antennas and our bucks and all those things together so we can serve customers with a greater, more comprehensive value proposition, because that's what they want from us. So we created an innovation foundry, or a technology accelerator, that we called Evoke. And we first brought all the technology across the enterprise together and put it on that venue as a kind of an incubator, so we could, and think of that as tools in a toolbox, think of it as building blocks, maybe think of it as Legos, where we found ourselves with Legos of different shapes and sizes and different colors. And when we started to assemble them in different ways, we found we could create customer value in a more comprehensive way that we had never done before. So that launched us to have some technology workshops with companies that had traditionally been our customers. And so we have a 2-day technology workshop where we shared with them that we had all these Legos of these different sizes and shapes. And we started to discuss the challenges that would confronted our customers. And could we take our Legos and put them together and create a technology solution that could bring them more comprehensive value? And we found, and amazingly, that really worked. And the customers started to get excited about the comprehensive value proposition, but then they started to challenge us and say, now, but can you also do this, or could you also do that? And by the way, I need it fast. Our engineers initially thought, well, okay, we'll launch an R&D program in 3 or 4 years, we'll have something like that. And the customer said, no, that's not what I'm talking about.
No, that's way too long.
I'm talking about when we have a meeting next week, I want that capability to be on the table. So we started to use our Evoke technology incubator, our innovation foundry. We started to use it as a way to create technology partnerships, largely with small companies or startups that had the technology that our customers wanted incorporated into this greater capability. Then we moved to universities, and we started to identify relationships with certain universities, because we wanted the university engagement, but we also wanted the talent pipeline, because we felt like the strongest STEM students, the brightest that wanted to be unleashed in an innovative culture, we wanted to attract them and have them know what we were doing and be part of it, even as an intern. So we launched our first enterprise-wide summer internship program this year, okay, to try to get that talent pipeline stimulated. So those are the kinds of things that we like in Arizona, and frankly, we're focusing on talent corridors that foster this innovative culture, that have this technology corridor and talent pipeline, have a strong university presence, because we see that if we're going to drive technology as fast and as steep trajectory as we possibly can, that those are the critical ingredients.
Oh, that's a recipe. I think there are a lot of executives who probably need to hear that clip right there. Greg, you're teaching in Arizona. So, and you know the ecosystem there very well, both on the policy side, on the business side, on the academic side. How do you see this evolving for Arizona and also possibly other states like Arizona in the new space economy? How are they finding their role? And universities like ASU clearly have a significant role to play. What do you see evolving there?
Well, the future is available, and the future belongs to those who show up. I think that's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And right now, it's Florida and Texas that are showing up. The governors of those two states understand the value of the future space economy. They've been aggressive in pursuing it. States that have a legacy and a lot of capabilities, like California, there's not a lot of sign at the state level that they care about that business. It's when you talk to entrepreneurs in particular, it's a difficult place to do business. California tends to generate new technologies and then chase them off to go somewhere else. Arizona in particular has a huge opportunity because there's a lot of people who'd like to be California adjacent, but not deal with Cal OSHA and a bunch of duplicative regulations and high taxes that make California unattractive to business. So they could grab it. I'm going to be honest, though. I don't see a lot of sign of that at the state level. I've tried to help some folks put together, some plans for Arizona, and one of the things they say is, well, we don't have any money, but, and it's like, well, if you don't care enough to put any money and you're not going to compete with Texas, you just put $350 million into their state space initiative, or Florida, who has Space Florida with a remarkable record of finding ways to make Florida an attractive destination for these companies. If you have a space event in Texas or Florida, the governor shows up. DeSantis is clearly really aware of what Space Florida is doing. He just reorganized the board there and put himself in charge of appointing the chairman. Abbott gets it. We recently had a state space event at ASU, and the governor of Arizona, who was right across town, phoned it in with a pre-recorded video message. So you've got to be serious about it. Now, to Arizona's benefits, both the senators totally get space. Obviously, one of them's been to space, and the other one has sat on the Senate committee, and she understands it very well and the opportunities there. But we've got to step up our game, if you want to win there. And I'm pretty harsh on my evaluations of who the winners and losers are going to be. But like I said, the future belongs to the people who show up.
No, well, and we appreciate it. At AFS, we're bipartisan, and we want real, and we appreciate candor and real answers, and frankly, some prescriptive ideas. So, before I turn, I think we're coming on our time here, gents. So I'd like to give you both just an opportunity, and maybe we'll just stay with you, Greg, and then I'll turn it over to Ken for the last word after that. Is if you could make 3 recommendations. We've covered a lot of things. We've talked about the history of space. We've talked about the clear convergence that is happening, and what was really, I think, I just want to highlight as a really important point. Ken described it from a user value driven perspective. So that was really interesting, because people talk about technological convergence, policy convergence, social convergence, but at the end of the day, so much of this, the historical examples that were provided clearly show it's driven by the customer demand and customer value. So what are perhaps 3 things you'd like to change, you'd like to see done, or you think are really exciting? Greg, to you first, and then I'll turn over to Ken for the last word.
Wow, if I was the space czar. From a national perspective, we've got to do something about our budgeting process to let NASA in particular have longer budget cycles. Right now, they're really concerned about what budget agreement will be reached between Congress and the White House, and everybody's expecting across the board cuts. That's difficult to deal with when you have programs with 10, 15-year windows on them. NASA needs to be able to have more certainty, so they're not looking to, rob Peter to pay Paul every time a new budget cycle comes through. Big deal. We need to get this space traffic management, space situational awareness situation locked in, so that we can go forward and help deal with a future where American leadership becomes a global standard. Lastly, from the global perspective, I think the Outer Space Treaty is problematic. People don't like to say this, but it was signed in a kind of spirit of 1960s kumbaya socialist sort of thinking, where only governments were space players, and it didn't really recognize the future we're facing now. We are going to have private property rights in space in order to have real economic development in places like the moon, eventually asteroids and other planets. If you cannot collateralize the real estate under your lunar factory or mine, if you can't transfer title to it and collect the value that you've added to that real property, it's going to be really hard to develop the economy that, to be clear, will benefit everybody on Earth. We've got to find a way to make that work. Without sovereignty, it's totally unclear how on Earth or how on the moon you can possibly determine what somebody's property rights are, or if they're being impinged. And if they are being impinged, then how can you possibly implement law enforcement? It is not going to be you in white hats showing up on the moon to separate some American commercial company from a Chinese state enterprise. So we've really created a dangerous situation, in my opinion, by not dealing with sovereignty and real property in space.
Thank you. Those are items that will surely be points of discussion and hopefully actual action sooner than later. Ken, please, same question to you to close us out. What are 3 things that you want to see Comtech do, and you think it could do, and really help the country and the world with? What do you think perhaps government needs to do, and what perhaps would you like to see states do and the country do in terms of workforce?
Well, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
You just that I got to unpack. But let me say first of all that I've been in the communications business my whole career, and largely the communications business for much of my life has been about connecting endpoints. And people's expectation was that over time we'd be able to connect more endpoints more efficiently with higher capacity in order to facilitate data transport in a holistic and a continually better game. In my view, that's all changed. See, and I agree with the things Greg said, but I think communications network infrastructures, it used to be about connecting smart endpoints through dumb pipes. Okay, and I think that is changing because there's an enormous amount of intelligence and information that flows over our networks. It's inherent in the data. We've talked about geospatial data. We talked about banking data. There's all kinds of weather data. There's an enormous amount of data. And so what we're looking at now is we're driving Comtech to recognize this technology inflection point, and it's becoming about smart, secure network infrastructures that harness the fundamental information that is inherent across the data and across the network, and then harnessing the economic power that creates by providing insights to our customers that are actionable, that create customer value. Okay, so it's not about just connecting the endpoints anymore. So we're kind of moving toward a world where there's not only value in building data network infrastructures to handle the geometrically increasing amounts of information flowing over our networks, but also creating data platforms that are sophisticated and intelligent enough to transport the data and analyze it, interpret it, process it, use it to predict future events, and use it so our customers can act upon it in a trusted way. Now, that I think is something that drives enormous thought, because from a policy perspective, these smart networks and all the data that's transporting over them becomes a domain that has to be protected. It has to be secured. It has to be thought about. I mean, if you look at the value of those networks, one could argue that the next conflict that might even be going on today won't be kinetic. Okay, it won't be traditional. It'll be about penetrating these networks, disrupting these networks, using artificial intelligence for good. But we have to bear in mind some might use it for evil. We know that there's the ability to create deep fakes. How do we trust the information that's flowing over the network? How do we make sure we secure it in the area of quantum processing and all of that? I think there's some really big challenges there. And when we talk about setting policy and protecting, we talk about governing space in a mature and responsible way. We need to start thinking about our networks and the enormous amount of information that is inherent in our networks. From a Comtech perspective, we're driving to not just be a transporter of data, but also be someone that can kind of harness that data that's inherent in the network and create customer value with it, and then monetize that customer value in innovative ways. That's the direction that we're moving, because we see the market moving, and that's what customers demand. It's a little like the analogy I gave a little bit ago about GPS. What we really don't need to see the dot move down the map. We really don't need to understand what's causing the congestion up ahead. We just want the actionable insight that says, if I'm going to preserve my time of arrival, I need to exit here, which I didn't plan to do, and I need to go a different way. That's all I really need to know. And the rest of the time, I'll be in the conversation with my partner that's in the passenger seat, and I can carry on with my day. So I think that now that gets also to teaching and academics. We need young people with STEM backgrounds, but we need them to think imaginatively about how to apply these technologies, how to put them to work in a way that creates value, connects the unconnected, bridges the digital divide, and leaves no one behind, democratizes access to information so that everybody is in a common playing field on a global basis. Okay, that's what I think drives us.
Well, folks, it has been an amazing discussion with Ken and Greg. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your insight and candor. I would also like to acknowledge our sponsors again because they made this possible. Thanks to America's Feature Series, Thunderbird School of Global Management, and Comtech. Please check out the America's Feature Series website for additional upcoming events, including the National Security Class Summit, which is Cyber, Land, Air, Sea, and Space, coming up on September 28th. For now, take care, and we look forward to seeing you next time.